Well, now, thank you, everybody. Um, it's so beautiful to be here in this place with all these old friends and teachers who've all taught me beautiful things in different ways, but especially Roshi, who has stuck with me. I am probably her slowest student. Like I came to Upaya for the first time. It was almost 30 years ago. And it's taken me this long to get to a certain point. And I will describe that in this talk, a bit of it. Uh, but first, I would just like to say that as I was coming down today from Seattle, I just wanted to say that today seems like a really good day to practice. You know, looking at what is happening in the world, um, the situations that seem hopeless in the Ukraine, in Gaza, and Israel, um, and even in our own country, you know, the conditions of this election just seem completely dislocating to me and different than anything we faced before. There's so many things, and that does not even include the climate crisis, right? We are all going to burn up if we don't act. And and even in my own little professional sphere, you know, the FDA just kind of gave MDMA a big bonk. That was kind of a disappointment. The I just got an email that I read on my way down that you know, in my health system, 40% of the faculty physicians meet criteria for serious burnout. And they said, this is a little better. and and you kind of think, well, but wait a minute, what about the people on the other end? You know, in the clinical trials I do, it now I've come to realize that for the first time, most offices, practices don't have a way for a doctor to call in and talk to the other doctor. Like this is the first time in my career I call these places and they're like, we don't answer phone calls. It's unbelievable. So, but before I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. So before I get into that, how did I come into this path? Uh, well, I will say it. I will even go back to start with my parents who emigrated from Korea. They left behind um, a kind of family, a personal life to come here and achieve. And I was kind of conditioned with that whole way of being in the world. Like you had to make your mark and find your way and have people recognize you. And that is how you would be valued. And I really grew up with that. My father drilled it into me. I mean, in his own loving way, that was really what he believed. And I think struggled with in the last part of his life. And as I came of age, you know, being kind of bullied, I was always the kid who was something different, who didn't hang out with the other kids. I was never part of the boys' club. And I was beginning to realize that I was a gay man, although it took me much longer to come out than it does now. Uh, I have felt quite split in my life, in my kind of achievement life and my personal life. They've always been hard to put together. And in the worlds I moved in, that was kind of the norm. You know, I remember being at medical school, following around a really famous oncologist, of an older woman we had been seeing in the emergency room because there was not enough beds in the hospital. And we turned around the corner one day, and the fellow said, well, what happened? The attending said, what happened to Mrs. So-and-so? And the fellow said, well, she died. And the famous doctor said, well, she was an old trout. And he turned the corner without another word, and all of us just followed him. And I thought, this is it? This is how you acknowledge the death of someone that you were responsible for? And it really troubled me for a long time that they had this kind of mode of being very knowledgeable and scholarly and professional. And yet when it came to the actual feeling part of the work, it just wasn't there. And I really struggled with that for quite a while. Before I came to UPI, the place that I first learned that was from Rachel Naomi Remen. She used to do these retreats in Commonweal in California. And she was the first mentor I had who talked about what it meant to develop kind of your heart, your feeling space. And yet, even then, as I was practicing oncology during the day and then going to these retreats at times, there were two different parts of me, right? There was a part of me that was trying to pay attention to this. And then there was a part of me that was doing what was needed to achieve all these milestones in the big world. And so I ended up coming to Upaya after that for being with dying for the first time because something was clearly happening in the world of how we take care of dying people. This retired pathologist, Jack Kevorkian, had just been on 60 Minutes, where he actually, on live TV, live streamed someone who was using euthanasia. And in the medical profession, it was kind of a time of reckoning. And I thought I wanted to be part of that. And at the time, and came to UPI because I thought maybe there is something else about how we could be with this, or how I could be with it as a physician. I didn't really realize it was going to be silent and there was going to be all this meditation and and all this structure. And I was like, oh my God, what is happening here? and yet by the end of the week, I could see how busy my mind was and how caught up in all these little cogs of aspiration that I was in. I remember asking at that first program, Roshi had said something about doing things that were the right things to do and not being attached to outcome. And I raised my hand. I was not a big question asker. And I said, well, how do you do that? And I realized that while something in me knew that that was the right thing to do, my thinking mind also knew that I had no idea how to do it. And that was what first got me started in this life of practice. And then I went home and started to notice some different things. As I could find moments of quiet in my mind, because I couldn't do the constant thing for quite a while. The continuous practice that Dogen talks about was, decades away from me. But I could find these other points of contact that I would take in a different way. One of the ones I remember was an older gentleman with terrible esophageal cancer. He was in the hospital. There was really no medicine that we had to offer. We had a big family meeting with him. Like there were 20 people in the room, and I was in my head going, oh my God, this is going to be a disaster. Because you get into these things in my business, where lots of people are upset and it just feels a little out of control. Well, this family was different. It turns out he was a chief from the local Coast Salish indigenous people, and he and his family handled the entire conference with a dignity that I had never seen before. And at the end of it, he said he wanted to do something for us. And I was like, of course. And so they planned it the next day, and I thought it was going to be a little procession. They had a little procession around the ward, and he was in the front in a wheelchair, and he was dressed in all his robes, and he looked at us all and made these gestures, and I realized he was blessing us. And I thought, I don't think I would have taken that in before, that the fact that he was blessing us, despite the fact that all our technology didn't work for him, it was quite a moment for me. And actually, just as another part of my identity, I think it was the first time I'd ever been blessed by another man. So fast forward, I kept working piece by piece on these parts of what was happening around me, which was a swirl of suffering, and what I would do to move through that. And I ended up coming back to being with dying because I realized that what I had been given as a physician, going to, some of the best schools in the country, like there was nothing about what you do with yourself. And so that thing about the guy, the famous attending who talked about the woman as an old trout, that was actually just the tip of the iceberg. What I saw over and over were physicians highly trained, very dedicated. As they became more learned, more accomplished, more recognized, more famous, what they would do is gradually withdraw themselves piece by piece from actual contact with the people who were suffering. And so they would make comments about them and opine on them and recommend things for them without knowing much of anything about the lived experience that those people were having. And that became for me a kind of new kind of split in my life as a physician. Sitting with people and thinking, I don't know what to tell you. And having these people become more famous, more abstracted, and more telling me what I should be doing and thinking with no practical guidance at all about how to do that. And this still exists in my field. Um, the vibe is you got to just look at the data and keep doing new things. And what I learned coming here and in those spaces now was that it was only really what I could myself imagine and empathize with and experience that would allow me to be in those places without um, great cost. I remember being here years later at being with dying, and an old friend of mine had come, um, and she had been really battered by the system. A woman uh, wanted to live in the country, was a single person who's trying to figure out how to find her way in the world. And her kind of patriarchal structure just ranked on her. She had all the extra shifts, she had all the extra work. She was the sensitive one, and so was expected to pony up every time there was some kind of really complicated case and got zero support. So she came, I looked at her and thought, oh my gosh, are you okay? And someone in our faculty meeting said, it looks like someone's drained all the blood out of her. And in fact, she was so pale that in retrospect, I think I'm embarrassed that I never like took her aside to say, like, are you okay? And what I learned listening to her in our groups was that it wasn't just about me having compassion for her. I was gradually absorbing what that involved for somebody like that. It was that she had no compassion for herself, and that it was really only as I could feel compassion for myself and what I had been through as a gay man who came of age when, the Supreme Court had criminalized what you did in your bedroom, right? It was only through finding the compassion for what I had been through, my mother who died of cancer when I was in college, uh, her family had not wanted to come and be a bone marrow donor. So I thought of our family as kind of a technology failure. Like, what kind of family does this, doesn't step up? Right. I had absorbed all this, but it was really only through coming to this realization that it was my compassion for myself that would allow me to actualize the teachings that Roshi has given me about what it means to allow compassion to emerge in the world between two people at first, and then larger and larger in the world. Um, And so that part of this practice has really been life-changing for me, I can say. I feel like it has enabled me to do a different kind of work now at this phase of my career. I now work in a safety net hospital where there are, it, the kinds of cases that are so sad and tragic and awful that you can't even imagine. It's hard to get through rounds. And part of that is, you do have to just figure out what your work is that day. But part of that is how do you meet those stories and meet those people in a way that they, at least for your brief visit, can feel seen, really seen. And as you do that as a practitioner, to experience what happens as a result of that. It's not just my seeing them. My seeing them can change how everybody else sees them and how even the system reacts to them. And so I have found that compassion, that set of practices that we will be teaching here in Grace, to be foundational and powerful, but in kind of a funny way. It's not like chemotherapy where you just know the dose and plug it in and it goes in there and then you check it out on the scans later. It is trickier. I have to be in the condition to offer and receive and be this agent of a kind of transformation of suffering into maybe something else. And, there are days when I'm not so great at it. And I have learned to forgive myself for that. Because there are other days when everything comes together and there are kinds of healing that happen that I never would have imagined. Most lately, I have been doing work with psychedelics with people with metastatic cancer in a group retreat setting. So this is the first study where people with metastatic cancer get screened for all their medical stuff. They come in to this rustic retreat center, almost like Upaya, maybe not quite as polished. I feel like Upaya has this aesthetic sense that just matches what we do here, the way we are trying to be in the world in this incredible way. But a place where people, they can go and we as a group of faculty can create a kind of container that provides some safety and a place where they can find compassion for themselves and compassion for each other, and for us to see how that changes their own course through cancer. One of my first patients, who was a kind of a red state kind of guy from the red part of our state, who owned a lumber yard and had prostate cancer, and he came in, he said he wanted to something spiritual, and I was like, okay, I don't know, but I was able to stop myself and just say, you know what, he is here like me because he is seeking. And I can feel the kind of seeking that I have had in him. And and it turns out then he had a really wild trip where he uh saw a billion colors and felt more love than he had ever felt in his life, and went to the bathroom and found out that he could pee jellyfish and they were all moving together. And then also that he wanted to scream at his cancer, but then he also realized that that was absurd and that he should love it and forgive it. So that's what he did. He forgave his cancer. And he said, that was the moment that really has changed me. And he actually, amazingly, I'm still in touch with him. He is still doing well, but it's one of those things where I feel like, wow, that coming together of these different things made possible something I would have never expected. Another one of our uh, patients who had been a nurse. She'd been a nurse through the AIDS epidemic. That's how she cut her teeth as a palliative care person, which was also how I kind of cut my teeth as a palliative care person. Um, she had a really difficult trip. She threw up a bunch in the middle. She cried. And she looked exhausted, and I felt exhausted for her, honestly. But the next day, she said, I remembered that I came into this world as kind of a replacement child because my um, mother had lost the brother, my baby brother that I never met. And so she had me, and she would dress me up in all his old clothes. And actually, I have been carrying all of this my whole life. I've been trying to live up to this. And seeing that and letting go of that, realizing that that was not hers to carry, was part of her healing. And what I remembered about that is it was my being able to see how I had wanted to dress up to be a different kind of person, to be a different kind of guy's guy, to not have a body that wanted things that I didn't want to feel, and to feel like I needed to live up to a kind of societal construction of what I should be that wasn't actually aligned with the deepest part of me. And my being able to find that in myself is what helped me be present for her. Even later, she developed brain mets. Then she was near the end of her life. Then she was deciding to do death with dignity in Washington, which is legal in Washington. So she was doing this legally. And I went to see her, to sit with her, and she's a meditator also. So first we just sat and kind of dropped into this space that was a space that we had both created, but that was a space larger than us, right? It was her family was at the edge of it. All my old patients who had tried death with dignity or wanted to do that, they were there. And her mother was even there. And she said, she had told me a time or two before, I wonder what it would have been like if someone had said, I see the greatness in you. And it's only to this point in my career where I can even see a little bit of the greatness in me that I was able to say before I left. Um, I just wanted to say one more thing. I see the greatness in you. And so that kind of learning it for me to come alongside someone without having to, you know, fix them or fiddle with them, but to really just be present deeply with them. That kind of coming alongside, which I think is the one of the outcomes of being able to work with a process like grace. One of the outcomes of being able to work with yourself as I have learned through these different phases of my own practice. There was a mindfulness phase, which was all about self-improvement, right? There's been a long compassion phase, which is all about what does it mean to be a portal for that in the world? And then this other phase, which is, I think, about what it is when I can even feel that I am her, that I am with all of you in a different way, that I am part of this bigger thing that we are all in different ways, and we are all making our way through. Um, that kind of practice at these times, in this moment in the world, has helped me find a ground where I can not be so sucked into, the politics of the moment, not be so sucked into all my own outrage, not be sucked into all my own hurt about what is happening in the world, and find ways to find a piece of ground and allow my body to help me understand what is needed. How I could be of service in this moment. What I have come to is we are really all here to take care of each other in some way, and take care of this planet and take care of the other beings who live here. And so the question that lives with me now is, how can I be of service today? And it is because this practice and this place has brought me back to these questions and these feelings over and over, is where my kind of devotion, I would say, comes from. Right? That ability to find something in this swirling world, where it feels like there's so much cruelty right now. There are, in my own small ways, things that I can sometimes do, sometimes just feel, sometimes make happen. And to me, that feels like the path of practice and the path of service. So as I look even now into what is happening in medicine, the patients who can't call the nurse because there's no phone number anymore for the nurse, right? That kind of stuff. It helps me not get too tripped up by my own outrage, so that I can find the moment of service, even in that. And so that is what I am still trying to do. And every time I come back to Upaya, I feel like there's a part of me that drops a little bit more into this, into what the energy that is happening here, so that I can learn that it's not just the books I'm reading. It's not the instruction I've gotten. It's those experiences. And honestly, those experiences have taught me so much. I was just in Japan with Roshi and the other priests. We were at Sojiji, which is like one of the big main Zen temples, at this big celebration. And I got a little lesson in experience. I was sitting in the back because I wanted to sit on a bench, because everybody else, like all these people, and they're older than me, they're sitting on the ground. They don't even have cushions. They're sitting on the ground at this big ceremonial thing. And I didn't really have all the right priest wear. Roshi will laugh because I was like, I'm like the original, like, well, I sent the email to the Zen priest workplace, and they sent me this box, and it's been in my basement. And then I bring it here, and it actually doesn't have the right stuff in it because I actually, anyway. So I was there, and I didn't have shoes. They're not shoes, they're little sock things. They're tabis. They're called tabis, and they're like little Bessie. Anyway, I didn't have them because I didn't bring them. And because I didn't know any better. They weren't on my list of things to bring from Taniguchi. So I was sitting in the back. And so in the bus before, one of the other priests had said, I have some you can have. And so I said, thank God, somebody else is going to help me. So it turns out this person is a tiny Dutch woman who has tiny feet, and my feet did not fit into the tabi. We were in the waiting room going into the thing, and when I realized this, I thought, what am I going to do? So I just stuffed my feet into them and left my black socks on and went into the room. And I thought, nobody will notice. They're so busy. There's this big thing going on, and they're flipping these scrolls and chanting, and people are moving back and forth. And then everybody is supposed to walk up to the altar. And so I thought, okay, if I can just get to that walk, then I'll be okay. Well, it turned out you had to do it twice. And then right before the first one, these guys ran up to me from the back, other monks, like the supervising monks, because they were wearing gold, gold cases. And they said, they were pointing at my feet. And I didn't, of course, I didn't speak any Japanese. And they were like, I was like, oh, shit. And they all of a sudden, I was surrounded by these monks who were all staring at my feet. And they said, what's going on there? And they was basically, and I was showing them that they didn't fit, right? And so they said, well, take them off. So I pulled them off. And then they looked at my my feet in black socks, and they all literally gasped. I still don't know why that was really a faux pas, but they all looked horrified. And I thought, oh my God, I'm not going to be able to go over to the altar because they're doing this, and half the group had already gone. We were in the back doing this. And anyway, I was like, okay, now what? Well, actually, so this was another moment of, I don't know what the way forward is, right? And then one of the monks, he literally took the tabi off his own feet and gave them to me. And I said, are you sure? And he's, yes, go. So I put him on my feet. I still couldn't buckle them up because they had these tiny little hooks in the back. And anyway, and they were like, okay, fine. So then they sent me over the line the first time. And then when I got back, they buckled them for me. But I was like, this is like one of those moments, right? Who would have known? This guy who looked, and they all looked super stern, like I thought I was going to get into trouble. And he gave me his tabi. And I thought, oh, this is actually the warm hand, right? Warm hand to warm hand is one of those things. And that is one of many kinds of experiences I have learned from all of you, from here, from learning to do the gong, to learning to do the bell. I'm still in this process, of course, but it helps me remember that all of that is a kind of practice for my body and my mind and my being to drop into this other place. And that when I can actually get my mind to stop for a moment and just be in this act of bowing or serving or, trying to put my okeza on the right way because it's complicated. I have the possibility of dropping into something else. So that is my way seeking mind talk. And so I just want to offer you all a deep bow of gratitude for all your patience with me and love and forbearance, and especially to Roshi, who's been so patient with me. I don't really seem to be going any faster in terms of progress, but of course, the progress is just being able to be here, right? And so, I'm a work in progress. So, a deep bow to you, Roshi, and all of you. Thank you.